What's up? All right, so what's up? How everybody doing? It's me here, A Wolf. Just making another video. Excuse me if it's a little. I'll take a couple seconds and pause here and there. I'm sitting right out front of the gym. It's a little awkward. I'm not used to doing videos, and people start looking at me weird to try to get in their cars. It's probably gonna be a little awkward. But today, I wanted to go over, or I wanted to just express, not go over, I wanted to express my views about being black, right? As a black man, black and spiritual. Now, when I say spiritual, real quick, I'm not going to spend all day. But when I say spiritual, I'm not talking about being Christian. I'm not talking about the Holy Bible. I'm not talking about voodoo. I'm not talking about typical spirituality, right? When I'm saying spiritual, I'm speaking more like just things not explainable by intellect, but things that more so you really find out by diving deep into who you are, or trying to really find out or take a journey into your own self, like through meditation or thought, contemplation, whatever have you. Now I'm gonna say that these types of philosophies, right? They come from, and I'm not rigid on what I'm saying, and I'm not trying to when I'm saying what I'm trying to say, I'm not saying that any other race has doesn't have its diversities and its wars and things like that. Definitely every continent, every place has had its issues, its wars and things like that. So I'm definitely not trying to discredit anybody, right? Any continent, any place. But if you're talking about, I'm talking about spirituality, right? So the Easterners have a whole different concept of spirituality compared to us Westerners. Somebody looking at me crazy. Us Westerners, right? So what I want to say about that is, because of their views on life, they have they're way more peaceful, right? They don't get caught up in certain things. They don't have, they don't really go crazy or really get vicious or violent or thought heavy or judgmental like Westerners do, like anybody who, follows the Holy Bible, right? In any type of context, whether you're, Jewish, Christian, whatever, Mormon-ish, not the same Bible, but Catholic. you have a certain way that you do things, and it's real. For the most part, it's a pretty linear way, because if anybody's not going your way, they're wrong. And when things like that happen, it tends to be where if anybody kind of disagrees with that, it can get pretty heated, and that's where the violence and that's where the judgment, the strong feelings come in. Now, in the Eastern aspect, they're thinking, because of the way that they think, the way they look at everything is a holistic view, the way they kind of philosophize or understand, right? Because it's not all about philosophy. The way they understand things is in a more holistic view, and the way everything is really coming together as what it actually is, as separate from what we like to label it, right? And what I'm saying when I say that is, a tree is not a tree. A tree is a living object. we are not a human. We are a living, we're a living being. The air is not air, it's living, everything is living and nothing is, dead. Even the dead, have certain living things that go back to the holistic view of living, right? Life and death. Death goes into life because from death comes new life, right? So it's all this like cycle of life, Lion King stuff. You know what I'm saying? Which is funny because nobody was ever hip on a Lion King like that. That circle of life stuff. But now, looking back, it's like, wow, man. They was talking about some deep stuff that nobody was really, hitting on. But anyway, yeah. So because of their, the Easterners, and because of their ability, because of their environment, because of their thinking is way different than ours, and they grew up with that thinking. For those who think in that manner, right? Not those, who are more into divinity and deists. What do I want to say? Like gods or whatever. Can't think of the word. My mind's going a little bit blank. But so those who more introspective and outer explanative, so they grew up in an environment where they learned to see everything as a whole and not everything is separate, right? And because of that, they were able to deal with their oppositions, their environment, their difficulties in a much different way. I don't historically have examples, but you can just understand that anybody who kind of thought in a way towards, if somebody does you wrong, you don't immediately need to, get back, get some get back to them or whatever, do something back to them or feel some certain type of way, because their understanding is more rich. Their understanding is more to the point where cause and effect. Something happened, and because of those proper circumstances, a thing happened. Somebody might have got mad at you and might have did something to you, and you might feel some type of way about what they did. Like if they cut you off in traffic, you might feel some type of way, anger, whatever. But with that understanding that they have about themselves and about everything else, and how everything is interconnected, something small and petty like that, they're not taking, and they're not getting mad as we might get, right? Because they understand, right? They understand the human emotion. They understand you don't know what's on the other side of that car. You don't know what that person was thinking. You don't know what that person going through. You don't know that person purposely cut you off, if we're going to use that as an example. You don't know. And sometimes actually accidents happen. That what you feel is as a result of that, but you don't need to continue to puff that up and go find that person and get back on them. Get some I can't think of the word I'm trying to say. But yeah, you don't have to go and get payback, right? Because it's bigger than that. Because you understand stuff happens and you feel the way you feel is justified, but you can sit with it, right? And that's not something we do. Like in our area, somebody cut you off, you mad, you ready to go at their head, right? Especially as a black person, right? And I say that to kind of illustrate how different we really look at stuff. So using that, I'm going to talk about what it means to be black, right? And I say black because I'm not meaning African, or you can say African American if that pleases you, whatever. But being black, right? Black is everything, everything associated with black is normally something dark, evil, different, aberrant. Just it's the opposite of white, duality. The difference between white, which is pure, is black, which is everything that is impure or other, right? The little bubble that's, you circle, that means other, right? So we're other, right? we're just other. And we're more so other than an African, right? Who's from Africa, who knows and can trace his history, right? Because of the fact that we were basically, as black people, as Africans, the originals, Africans, we were taken from our homeland, stripped of every fiber of any culture that we had. We would replace those cultures with tools, tools to do some man's work that in a country that was foreign to ours. And we had no choice. We had no idea what was going on. We just knew that we woke up. It was a night. I mean, I suppose that we just knew that something happened. We went to sleep and we woke up, and it was a nightmare. And everything that we remember from the past day or past night was a complete nightmare, and we couldn't believe it. And we couldn't believe that we weren't in Africa anymore, and we were just, all of a sudden, we were in this new country that they were going to name America, and all of a sudden, we weren't really just chilling, you know, beating around the bush, or we wasn't just chilling and just kicking it. Now, some people were threatening us, threatening our lives, and saying, oh yeah, you need to work, and you need to build me this, and you need to farm this, you need to do this, or else I'm going to kill you, or whatever have you. I'm going to punish you. And from that started our new heritage of people, from the people who were enslaved. And from that, we had to learn how to go about our situations and continue to live while we were being held in prison by these people, right? Imprisoned by these people to do their work. Enslaved, right? Everything we had was taken away, right? Our culture, and we were just, completely traumatized to the fact where probably even our sanity was taken away. So whatever religion we had, what happened to that, right? It was replaced. Now, I'm not going to say that Christianity or the Bible scriptures did not exist in Africa, but for sure, the Christian faith, more or less, was not an African. A majority of an African, on a majority scale, was not an African thing, right? So they replaced our religion with the Christian faith, or a supplemented version of it, because we couldn't read the letters. We couldn't read. They didn't let us read. So they gave us a little bit of it and said, here's your faith. And it's probable that they gave us the parts that made us more or less easier to deal with, right? We didn't want to cause too much friction, right? So they gave us the parts about peace and turn the other cheek and say, here's you go. Here's your faith. Here's something to escape into, right? Here's your hope. So they replaced that, right? Now, we were slaves, and we were slaves for a while. We were slaves until some slaves said, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. We're getting out of here. And other slaves were probably like, hey, you're crazy. You're going to die. And they were probably like, hey, man, I don't care. I'm done with this, If you're with me, come on. If you're not, you can stay here and, you can die and work for the rest of your life or whatever. Some, probably were too fearful, and some had the courage, right? And they had the courage, and because some had the courage, we eventually got out of that, right? We protested our environment, right? We protested our treatment until we got out of it, right? So from there, history, it was a new chapter in history. It was a new page in history, right? So from that, we had the black people who were independent. We had the black people. It started, if you're following me, the first chapter was slavery and, enslavement. And the next chapter was, the independence, the new independence of a black man in a foreign land, and him trying to just become his own man, okay? So from the second chapter of that independence of the black man, we can start our heritage, right? But if we're starting our heritage from that, what do we have, right? We're foreigners, not having our own culture. We don't know nothing about our own culture. We're foreigners in a different land, right? We had to take up the culture of the natives, right? That wasn't ours. We had to figure out how to do things that we've never done before. We had to figure out probably to eat things we've never eaten before. That wasn't our choice, but was the choice of the land, right? This is what we had. We had to figure out how to be people again. We had to figure out what to do from here, right? We had to figure out our own way, because our actual way we didn't remember, we didn't know, or we couldn't get back to. So we had to make up whatever. So now follow me when I'm saying this. Like, when we started from that point, we started from zero, right? When we were Africans, we had African culture, we had African heritage, right? We have, African beliefs, spiritualities, we had all that richness. When we started from zero, we started from scratch. So we had to basically bake up everything that from there on that we was going to do. Now we fast forward through culture, we fast forward through segregation, we fast forward through us being segregated off to poor sections of the country and poor places, and basically pushed away from and kind of wanting to be forgotten, so that we can basically be encased in, so that we will be having all kind of turmoil and all kind of frustrations, and we would basically eat ourselves whole, because they only gave us this much room. So of course, when you close in somebody, it's going to be nothing but frustration and violence and anger, because that's not how we're supposed to live, right? And plus, who are we, right? So that's the black part, right? The black part, right? This black part that I'm speaking is starting from that zero, right? We're not African. We have dark skin in a country where everybody's skin is white. Like, what's going on, right? And we don't know why we're here, but everybody with the light skin just hates us, right? We didn't ask to be here. So here we are trying to make something of ourselves, make anew, starting from zero, and the light-skinned people hate us. But we didn't ask to be here. We don't know how we got here. Or we do know how we got here, but we don't know why they brought us here. We don't know what, So because of that, and because of our ingenuity as black people, we became creative and made our own way. So let's say we made our own way, right? But they stuffed that way, and they didn't want us to make our own way. They wanted us to stay to the side. Some people, I'm not going to say all, Caucasians or all Americans at that time, wanted us to be dead, probably, but it was the common cultural thing for us to just be second class or not even human. So although we tried to strive, and although we tried to go about and making our new way and start from zero, I don't want to do that. Start from zero. I was trying to check the time. Even though we tried to start from zero, they didn't want us to have anything. So because of that very thing is a fact, it started our heritage of the anger and the ferocity and the just us wanting to just be people. But we were a people living amongst people who didn't want us to be people, right? So we only could do what we could do. So at that point, because of this hatred towards us, we didn't become a people of our own abolition, of our own selves. We became products of our environment, right? Because we were brought to this country, but we weren't given the tools to make our own. We were given scraps, we were given, hand-me-downs, leftovers, and we had to scavenge through what we got and kind of try to make a way for ourselves, right? But all the while, these people who brought us here wanted us to die, wanted us to just disappear. right? So what does that do but make you angry and make you you know just, it hurts, right? So and we came from, the people from then came from hurt, came from pain, came from frustration, and it carried on, um until we had like the Martin Luther Kings, the Malcolm X's, right? The people who kind of were the big just towers of standing against, right? And they were the people who just came out, the one in a millions who just said, who had the power, who had the skill set, who had the mind, who had the genius, who had the creativity to try to do something about that, right? And try to get us out of that and try to just say, hey, we're people. So all of this stuff, right? And even today, now, with the protest and everything, we can see it's not fixed. It's not fixed. It's still the same. It's smaller, but it's still the same, right? Racism or whatever, whoever, the people who just don't want us to, and it's much bigger than what we see. It's much bigger than the violent acts of police or anybody. It's much more subtle. It's not really, if you know what to look for, it's not even subtle. But so I say all that to say I say all that to kind of illustrate or kind of build my point here. I'm saying, like, we were a people washed of our own culture, of anything, any identity. And then from there we became a people who were just fighting to make our own, fighting to be able this to exist. We were fighting to exist. We were fighting to just be people. We were fighting for esteem, right? Just, we are people too. By people who brought us here, who brought us to a country we didn't ask to be, and then who had the audacity to even furthermore hate us because we existed when we were we were minding our own business, and then they came and took us captive and took us to this land, and then they had the audacity to say, hey, why do you exist? And look at us and hate us, right? So if you think about all of that contained and balled up in the ghettos and the grime and the filth that we had to figure out and root through and try to become people, right? Now, imagine all of that frustration. Imagine that. In every generation, that is passed on, right? That ferocity is passed on. And it might not be passed on purposefully, but it's passed on in our genes, right? It's passed on in our DNA. It's passed on in our consciousness, right? And not just the consciousness of our mind, but the entire, getting into Eastern thinking, the entire consciousness of our being, right? Every fiber of our DNA. That frustration, that anger. Even if we're not angry, even if we never had a reason to be angry, it's still, we have anger in us, because somewhere down along the line, back far enough, we were a people, our ancestors were angry, right? And they died with that anger. And they had kids, and their kids, the anger went into their kids, right? Now those genes, those particles of anger, those particles of everything, right? They were carried on, right? And no doubt the kids saw things too. So they had their own firsthand experiences along with the anger inside their own blood, right? Now, I'm just talking about segregation and stuff like that. I'm just talking about, for the anger, on the anger part of segregation in our own blood. But you want to get deeper, you really gotta go back to slavery, because you think about how the black person now, as American black, as all of us who don't really know where we came from, we don't know which part of Africa where we came from. We don't have we don't have that luck of knowing where we came from. We came from slaves, right? And we came from people, enslaving people who were bred to be better slaves, like dogs, right? So, and you got to think like we were probably bred, excuse me, we were probably bred like without love, without any type of, manner of humanity, to where the it was consensual or wanted or anything like that, right? We were probably bred like bulls, like, just made to make more tools or make more profit. Now, coming from, if you think about all of that, right? That anger of two souls, angry, saddened, frustrated, depressed, with no hope. You think about the consciousness as two beings, right? With all those negative emotions, and you make a person from those two people, of both of those, compounding emotions. What are you going to have but a person who was made from just anger and sadness and depression and angst? You're not going to have a happy soul. You're not going to have a happy person, right? You're not going to have a happy being. So, and those beings go on to probably be mated to make more beings, to make more people, make more slaves. So we just have a perpetuated genocode of sadness, angst, anger, depression, suicidalness, whatever. And when you make a people from that type of mode, how can you have anything but just how can you have anything positive in your person? Because you were made from so much woe. Now, to put it with what I was saying, my main point, I'm gonna add it together here, right? So to put that with my main point, is what I'm saying is we were made, right? We were made. Like we were factory made people, bro. Like we were cloned, or we were, basically put together as not by love or by want or by desire. We were made for being tools, or whatever you want to call it. So what that does to a person is it basically, if you want to think about it in an artistic sense, if we have souls, or if you want to think about it in a just a simple sense of, if we had a soul, and you take the soul out of a person and it's just an android or a husk, right? We were a people without souls. When we were made, when we were procreated against our will, we were husks. Any black person was a husk. Any slave and bred person wasn't a person with a soul, with love. We were husks. So we were husks, breeding with other husks, making more husks, right? Soulless individuals. I don't believe in soul. I don't believe in things like that. But for the purpose of illustration, I would say soul, right? So we were husks, right? Nothing. We were lifeless. Tools. Why are we here? Why are we having a kid? You look at your kid, you don't have any love for it. Or you're just saddened by it because you know when it grows up, it's going to have to do the same thing you're probably going to die doing. Now you think about what that does and what that puts into not only your mind, but in every fiber of your being, right down to your DNA code, right? If you put anger, sadness, that much deep woe into your DNA, it's in your freaking DNA. It's in your DNA, and it's rich in your DNA. Now, and you take that from slavery, and you go into segregation, you go into, what's after segregation, the 70s, or, just the 90s, and the hip hop era. All of that is still in our DNA. It's been in our DNA. It's instinctual, right? So it's like everything, it's like because of that post-traumatic stress, being post-trauma, it's almost like it made in our DNA a wildness, like a wild animal. If you kind of like related to a wild animal, like if you breed a cheetah with another cheetah, they have that wild instinct. There's no way you just have a cheetah and he just all of a sudden calm. He just all of a sudden like, I don't feel like being a cheetah. No matter how many cheetahs you breed, you're gonna have that wild instinct. Now, because they come from the wild. That's their instinct. That's their DNA. It's in their DNA. It's in their consciousness as their being, right? Their being contains the consciousness of just being wild, ferocious, instinctual, right? So in the same way, black people were made from that same wild instinctualness, right? Because we were bred from being a wild people, right? Being a people with that instinct of that trauma. So even post the trauma, our DNA still had that trauma, still had that wildness, right? Still had that post-traumatic stress disorder, to where we were fight or flight. Our DNA contained fight or flight, whether we wanted it or not, right? So anything that triggered, like how you would trigger, you think like how people think, oh, I have this wild animal and they're so sweet and they'll never do anything to harm me. But as soon as you trigger that wild instinct comes out, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, that's a wild cheetah. Like it ain't what you thought, right? So I would say that with black people, because we were bred from, turmoil and woe, we were like that wild cheetah. So whenever you trigger that post-traumatic stress, it would go off like a wild cheetah, right? And what's the thing though? We didn't grow up in like assuaging, calm, peaceful environments or neighborhoods, right? Where did we grow up? In the hood, right? We grew up in the very places that would trigger that, and it would just trigger it in a crazy way, in multiple ways, in multiple times, multiple days, multiple months, times a month, multiple times a year, multiple times an hour,